Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the heart of ancient Persia where the air burns dry. The sun is relentless, and the idea of a frosty drink sounds like something out of a fever dream. But somehow, thousands of years ago, people figured out how to make ice in the middle of a sun-scorched desert. You're about to wander into a land of sand, silence, and genius where the nights are cold. The nights are quiet, and the engineering will quietly blow your mind. Picture it. You're standing barefoot on cracked earth, the heat of the day still radiating from the ground, even as the sky turns deep indigo. You hear the faint whistle of wind and the occasional bray of a donkey in the distance. Somewhere nearby, children are being ushered indoors. Lanterns flicker, and date palms rustle like whispers. In the middle of all this ice, real, tangible, clinking in a bowl, ice. You probably won't survive this if you're a bag of frozen peas, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move slowly through the golden light of twilight, stepping into a quiet Persian courtyard. The buildings are clipped and unassuming, their architecture soft and rounded, as if shaped by wind itself. Everything here is hushed. The sky overhead deepens from lavender to midnight blue, studded with stars so clear they feel within reach. You squint into the shadows and there it is. A massive dome rises from the sand like an inverted cone, wide at the bottom and tapering toward a jagged tip. It looks like something between a beehive and a spaceship, but it's neither. It's called a yakhchal, and it's a technological miracle of the ancient world. You pause at its base, pressing your palm to its cool mud brick wall, marveling that it's still intact after all this time. Historians still argue whether the earliest yakhchals date to the Achaemenid Empire or came later under the Sassanids, but either way, we're talking well over 1,500 years ago. That's before your air conditioner, before your fridge, before ice makers were even a fantasy in anyone's sweaty mind. Inside this strange dome, ice was made, stored, and even sold. You'll learn later how it was actually created, but for now, you just bask in the irony. The middle of a parched, unforgiving desert, and yet, coldness. You crouch by the narrow entrance, peering into its darkness. A breath of chilled air brushes your face like the dome is exhaling. Inside, the temperature drops so suddenly it tickles your skin. You step in, slowly, feeling the way your breath begins to fog. It smells like earth and silence. The interior is vast, more cavern than chamber. The walls slope inward, toward a central pit, deep below ground level. That's where the ice would be stored, protected by layers of insulation, architecture, and clever physics. The floor is covered in ancient straw mats and broken pots. Perhaps, long ago, they held snow, sherbet, or some sweetened date concoction, so cold it made teeth chatter. You lean against the inner wall. Its thickness is astonishing, up to 2 meters in places. The material is called saruj, a miraculous mix of clay, sand, ash, egg whites, lime, and goat hair. This oddball recipe made it waterproof, breathable, and surprisingly resistant to the kind of blistering heat that would make a metal spoon feel like a branding iron. You can almost hear the ancient engineers chuckling, knowing they'd found a way to thumb their noses at the sun itself. A soft breeze filters down from somewhere above. You crane your neck and spot a hole at the top of the dome of ventilation shaft. Warm air rises, cooler air sinks. Basic stuff now, but back then, this was almost magical. You start noticing little details. Grooves in the walls for runoff water, stone basins used to catch melting ice, and dried palm fronds stacked like forgotten insulation. It's all passive. No gears, no fire, no manual labor once it's built. The desert sun is harsh, but the Persians learned to play nice with it, using nature to fight itself. One man's blistering heat became another's nighttime frost. Here's a fun little quirk. In some cities, people built yakhchals right next to cemeteries. Partly because the ground was soft enough to dig deep cooling pits, and partly because no one was going to complain about zoning laws from underground. Outsiders often thought it was sorcery. European travelers stumbled across these ice domes centuries later and reported tales of mystical desert freezers, that ancient Persia had discovered some long-lost climate control spell. But no, it was just good science, good design, and probably some very sweaty trial and error. Still, historians can't quite agree on how widespread the Yakhchal system was. Were they limited to noble families? Was this cool luxury a common perk in certain cities? Or was it more symbolicizing a status? We may never know for sure, but the fact that so many have survived, even in ruin, tells you something. This wasn't just a novelty, it was vital, practical, valued. Go step back outside, where the last of the light is slipping behind distant dunes. The air is cooling now. Crickets chirp half-heartedly. Somewhere, water trickles maybe from a qanat, those underground aqueducts. Persians used to move water for miles beneath the baking surface, but that's a thought for later. For now, you just sit quietly beside the Yakhchal. The dome looms over you like a guardian, its strange silhouette gently catching the starlight. You imagine all the families who once visited this place, collecting ice chips to soothe a feverish child, vendors chipping away at blocks for drinks, young couples sneaking here just to feel the cold on their fingers and laugh in the dark. And there you are, in the middle of the desert, cooling down, cooling down. You rise from your quiet spot beside the Yakhchal, brushing sand from your robes, or at least, that's how it feels now. This place is pulling you in deeper, and before you know it, you're moving closer to the structure again. You run your fingers along the wall, tracing its odd, lumpy curves, marveling at how something that looks so handmade could be so effective. This isn't just a building, it's a system, a philosophy, a very patient rebuttal to the desert. The Yakhchal, literally, ice pit in Persian, is deceptively simple on the outside, but everything about its shape is intentional. That beehive dome you're staring at is not just for decoration. It's designed to minimize surface area exposed to the brutal midday sun while maximizing internal air circulation. Tall and narrow at the top, wide and grounded at the bottom, it's the desert version of an upside-down thermos. You pace slowly around it, noting that most of the dome is actually below ground. The deep ice pit inside could be 5 meters or more down, like a reverse oven for cold. No refrigeration coils, no freon, no humming compressor in the background, just insulation, clever engineering, and the willpower to build something gigantic from nothing but local materials. Saruj, the mudbrick plaster we mentioned earlier, is the Yakhchal's secret weapon. You imagine someone back then, maybe a grumpy architect named Ardeshir, arguing with his workers over the perfect mix. Not enough egg white, too much lime. Where's the goat hair? And yet, somehow, the result was a building material that didn't just resist heat and water, it laughed in their faces. As you walk, the night breeze tickles your skin. You glance at the stars. Orion is rising. Somewhere far away, maybe a camel sneezes. You step over a few scattered shards of ancient pottery, perhaps, once used to carry the precious ice inside. Some Yakhchals stored blocks hauled in from the mountains during winter, dragged in bundles wrapped in straw or jute. Others generated their own ice, using methods you'll see soon. Either way, these massive domes weren't just for storage, they were ice vaults. Temperature-regulated bunkers built to outsmart the climate. And the dome wasn't working alone. Yakhchals were often paired with another desert marvel, the qanat, sloped, underground tunnel system that carried water from distant mountains straight into the city. Picture it like an ancient plumbing system, only instead of pressure, it used gravity. The water stayed cool in the darkness of its earthen tunnel, and the flow was gentle enough to avoid evaporation. A marvel in its own right. Some had qanats running directly beneath them, feeding cool water into the chamber to keep ice from melting or at least delay the inevitable. You pause and crouch, pressing your ear to the ground. Of course, you don't actually hear running water, but if you did, it'd sound like history whispering. Now, let's talk temperature. Modern measurements of functioning Yakhchals show they could stay below freezing inside, even when the desert blazes at 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. How? That dome shape again. Hot air rises and escapes through vents near the top. Cool air sinks, with thick walls and shaded positioning usually aligned to avoid direct sun. It all works in harmony. Historians still debate exactly how early Persians perfected the balance of shape, material, and ventilation. Was it a slow evolution over centuries, a brilliant one-off idea that spread like wildfire? Or maybe a little of both? We can only guess. But what's clear is that these people weren't just surviving the desert. They were styling in it. Let's not forget the psychological side of the act. Imagine walking through the sweltering streets of Yazd or Korman, sun stabbing at your scalp, sweat pooling behind your knees, and then stepping into this earthen dome. The temperature drops. Your body exhales. The silence deepens. You feel safe, cared for. Cold becomes a gift. It wasn't just functional, it was spiritual. And this is a fun tidbit. There's some evidence that yakhchals occasionally doubled as meditation spaces during off-seasons. Cool, quiet, and naturally soundproofed. Sounds like the perfect place to sit with your thoughts, or just escape your neighbors for an hour. You wander around to the shaded side of the structure. The moonlight casts gentle shadows on the wall. There's a small, rectangular opening, here just big enough to squeeze through if you really wanted to. Don't worry, you won't. This was likely a servicing hatch, used to remove or deliver ice when the main door was sealed. Workers would pass chunks of frozen water through here, wrapped in straw and cloth, carried away on carts or shoulders. You picture a vendor calling out in the market square, "Ice for sherbet, fresh ice," and someone else muttering, "It's not that fresh, it's from January." Because yes, these yakhchals could preserve ice for months. It was all about timing. Make or haul the ice in winter, store it in the dome, sell or use it throughout spring, and even into summer. The economics of it all will come later, but let's just say, if you controlled the yakhchal, you had power. Literal cool power. You reached the front again, settling down by the entrance once more. A warm gust of air brushes past you, but the structure stands firm, unbothered, unmelting. You get the strange sense that the dome is still watching the stars, still doing its job centuries later, waiting for someone to ask how. You stand up again, stretching slowly. The sand shifts beneath your feet as you begin circling the yakhchal one more time, but this time your focus turns downward. It's not just what's above the surface that matters, here it's what's buried deep below, because the magic of this ancient ice house didn't stop at domes and plaster. No, the real sorcery happened underground. You wander to the edge of the structure, where a barely visible slope leads down into the earth. Step by step, you descend into the cool, dry gloom of a storage pit. The air grows colder as you go, not in a dramatic horror movie kind of way, but in a quiet, steady sense, like someone gently turning down the thermostat. It smells faintly of clay and old water, and possibly goat hair. Down here, you begin to understand the full brilliance of ancient Persian design. These substructures weren't just hollow holes, they were precise, thermodynamic masterpieces. If that's not too glamorous a title for a hole in the ground, the deeper a space is, the more insulated it becomes from the blazing heat of the sun. At a few meters down, the temperature stays relatively constant, year-round, usually hovering between 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, 50 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes lower. Combine that with the insulating spruge, and you've got yourself a naturally refrigerated cavern that requires zero energy input. You imagine yourself living centuries ago, kneeling beside a massive ice block in the pit, chipping away with a bronze tool, careful not to let your breath fog up your view. That ice didn't just appear here by accident. It was either brought from distant mountaintops or, more impressively, made right here. Yes, made. Because the Persians weren't just clever hoarders. They were manufacturers. You move back up the slope and walk a few paces away from the Yakhchal, across a dry, dusty courtyard that was once filled with shallow stone-lined pools. They look a bit like empty reflecting ponds or very fancy baking trays. But their purpose wasn't beauty or baking. These were freezing basins, part of a nighttime ice production system that still feels like a cheat code against nature. Here's how it worked. During winter nights, temperatures in parts of the Iranian plateau could dip well below freezing even if the days were warm. Locals would fill these wide, shallow pools with a thin layer of water in the evening. As night fell, the combination of low ambient temperatures, radiative heat loss, and minimal thermal mass, that's fancy speak for very shallow water, allowed the water to freeze on the surface. In the morning, the thin sheet of ice was carefully skimmed off and carried to the Yakhchal for storage. Night after night, more ice would accumulate. It was slow work, but efficient. You smile at the idea of an ancient ice farmer in thick woolen robes, bending over the pond at dawn, muttering, "Ugh, only half frozen again." Typical. Historians still argue whether these ponds were specially treated with ash, salt, or other cooling agents to boost ice formation. Some fringe theories even suggest rituals were performed to bless the water, though that might have just been villagers complaining about a dry spell, and the placement of these freezing basins wasn't random either. They were aligned to minimize wind disruption and maximize exposure to the open sky. Some had windbreaks built from mud brick to protect against gusts, which could disrupt ice formation, because when you're trying to freeze water 1 millimeter at a time, even a breeze can ruin your day. You crouch beside one of the old basins, running your hand along its edge. You can still see the tiny grooves where overflow water would drain into channels leading back to a reservoir, because nothing went to waste. Even meltwater had a second life, sometimes funneled back into the canal system to irrigate nearby gardens. The whole setup was symphonic in its efficiency. And speaking of symphonies, let's not ignore the quiet choreography this required. Someone had to fill the pools at dusk, monitor the weather, skim ice at sunrise, carry it across the courtyard, deposit it into the yakhchal, cover it with straw, and repeat, over and over and over. It was less Jack Frost and more janitor of chill. Still, the outcome was extraordinary. These people were freezing water with no power grid, no machines, and no access to modern refrigerants, and they were doing it centuries before electricity was even a sparkle in anyone's imagination. You rise from the basin and gaze across the sand toward the distant mountains. Imagine hauling giant ice blocks from snow-capped peaks on camelback, wrapped in sawdust or rice husks. A multi-day journey. Talk about commitment to the chill. Yet, despite their ingenuity, historians are still piecing together how standardized these techniques were. Were freezing basins part of every major yakhchal site? Did only certain cities have the perfect climate for this method? Did mountain ice delivery and pond freezing operate side by side, or was one a backup plan? It's possible that no two yakhchals worked exactly alike, like snowflakes, but made of sand and very ambitious architectural students. You stroll back toward the main dome, the sand cool now under your feet. You pass a crumbling wall that might have once held measurements, scratched into cliff of ice levels perhaps, or a grumpy note about how someone let the straw get moldy again. You picture a sleepy teenager, tasked with early morning skimming, grumbling all the way to the basin, knowing his friends are still curled up by the fire. Suddenly, your modern brain flickers. This is sustainability. No emissions. No fossil fuels. Just smart use of space, time, and materials. Somehow, these ancient Persians achieved what entire governments are still struggling to do. Climate harmony without destruction. You lean against the dome again. The wind has picked up slightly, brushing your face with cool, dry fingers. You close your eyes, feeling the contrast between this open air and the depths you just visited. Above and below, heat and cold, sand and ice, and all of it held together by a structure that, at first glance, looked like a giant mud cupcake. You linger beside the yakhchal a little longer, letting your body absorb the quiet cool of the desert evening. But something still buzzes at the back of your mind. Ice in the middle of the desert is already impressive, but making ice in the open air, under the stars, that still feels like someone cheated the laws of physics. So now, with a curious squint and a slow sand-crunching walk, you head toward those shallow basins again. You want to understand how this nightly miracle unfolded. The air has turned crisp, and you can see your breath just faintly in the moonlight, proof that even here, in this arid expanse, nature gives you a narrow window of opportunity. But the Persians knew this. They studied their surroundings, their seasons, and they played the long game. You stop beside one of the freezing pools, and this time, you really imagine it. The water glistening under the starlight, perfectly still, not deep, barely the depth of a tea saucer. The shallow design was key. Too much water, and it wouldn't freeze. Too little, and the yield would be a joke. But just right. And by dawn, you've got a wafer of ice. Now, let's zoom in on what's actually happening here. At night, the desert releases the heat it stored during the day. As the ground cools and the skies remain clear, radiative cooling kicks in. That's when objects like this thin sheet of water lose heat by radiating it out toward the cold vacuum of space. No clouds to trap it, no humidity to slow it down, just water, quietly exhaling heat into the cosmos. You blink. Space. Ancient Persians were basically using outer space to freeze water. You probably never thought of the desert as a laboratory, but now you're picturing scholars with sunburns and calloused hands, scribbling notes on clay tablets about heat loss and freezing rates. Of course, they didn't call it radiative cooling. They just knew it worked, and that was enough. Here's a quirky twist. In some regions, they even used black stone trays instead of regular earth pools. Black, as you know, absorbs heat, but at night, it also radiates it better than lighter materials. So, paradoxically, using dark stone helped the water cool faster once the sun set. It's like dressing your salad in barbecue sauce to keep it cold. Counterintuitive, but brilliant. Historians still argue whether this method of ice making was a widespread technique or more localized to cities like Yazd, where elevation and nighttime lows made it feasible. Some believe it was ceremonial as much as functional, a way for the community to come together during the coldest months and essentially harvest the chill. You glance around. You can almost see them, bundled figures in woolen cloaks, hunched by the basins, poking at the ice with sticks, muttering about clouds ruining everything. Someone trips and lands face first in a half-frozen pool. Laughter erupts. It's late, it's freezing, and it's a lot of work. But there's pride in it. You move toward a small wall that once separated the basins from the wind. These mud brick screens were carefully placed to prevent drafts from disrupting the water's surface. The smoother and calmer the water, the better the ice formed. You trail your hand along the ridged brick. It's not just functional, it's elegant in its intent. And then you notice something else. A small, square depression in the ground, filled with coarse straw. This was part of the morning ritual. Once the ice was skimmed, it was gently wrapped in straw, or reed's primitive insulation, to keep it from melting before it reached the yakhchal. Workers used large woven baskets or clay vessels, stacking the fragile layers like glass. Every movement had to be careful, delicate. No one wanted to spill half a night's work onto the sand, of course. Not every night produced usable ice. Some nights were too warm, others too windy. Or a stray goat wandered into the basin again. You sigh, imagining a disgruntled farmer waking up to find hoofprints in the middle of his almost frozen water. And the goat, probably smug. Still, ice kept trickling in, night by night. Small victories, like a freezer slowly stocking itself, one whisper-think sheet at a time. Eventually, these thin layers added up to serious volume, and when packed together in the yakhchal's cool belly, the mass of ice created its own cold microclimate. One sheet cooled the next. The dome became a self-reinforcing cold zone. You sit for a while beside the basin, watching the stars blink overhead. There's a calmness here that's hard to describe. The kind of calm you get when humans stop fighting nature and start working with it. No loud machines, no buzzing transformers, just wind, water, straw, and patience. And yes, jokes aside, it was a little bit of a community event. Young boys might be sent out in teams to gather ice, while elders watched the process from porches or rooftops, murmuring about how the winter just isn't what it used to be. Ice was celebrated, sometimes shared at feasts, used in special drinks, or presented to the sick as a cooling balm. In rare cases, records suggest that offerings of ice were made to temples, particularly during summer solstice festivals. Whether it was symbolic, medicinal, or just dramatic flair, who knows? But you can imagine a priest lifting a bowl of frost toward the sun, declaring, "Take this, you blistering orb." There's also a bit of mystery. Some archaeologists have uncovered small ceramic whistles or bells buried near yakhchals and freezing basins. Were they used to scare off animals, mark sections of the pool, or just dropped accidentally during a midwinter game of tag? No one's sure, but it adds a hint of personality to this otherwise silent system. Eventually, you rise again. The basin, Behind you is dry now, cracked in places from years of disuse. But for centuries, it echoed with the soft sounds of freezing water, straw rustling, and the clink of ice against clay. Even now, that echo still feels near. You head back to the dome. As you step into its cool shadows again, you realize the genius wasn't in building cold places, it was in timing. The Persians didn't need to make everything cold all the time. They just needed to capture the cold when it arrived and know how to keep it. And as you rest your hand on the old Saruj wall once more, you understand the full scope of it. Ice, pulled from the breath of the desert night, stored underground like treasure, shared with care, treated with reverence, all with no buttons, no cords, and no emergency repair guy named Dave. You take a deep breath, letting the air fill your lungs dry, cool, and tinged with dust. The Yakhchal stands behind you like a silent monument, but now your attention shifts to another marvel. Something far less obvious, yet arguably more impressive. You lift your gaze and catch the silhouette of a tall, narrow tower rising above a nearby building. It seems almost decorative at first, till a gentle breeze brushes your face, cool and unexpected. That tower just exhaled at you. You're looking at a windcatcher, or badger in Persian, a centuries-old form of passive air conditioning that did more than just stir the air. It reshaped how people lived, built, and cooled themselves in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Windcatchers are easy to miss if you're not paying attention. They rise above homes, mosques, bathhouses, all hollow towers with open slats on all sides. But these aren't just there to look elegant or to show off a homeowner's weird obsession with verticality. These towers were functional. They captured the wind, funneled it downward, and distributed it through a building like some slow-motion, whispering air wizard. You walk toward one now, your sandals crunching softly against the packed earth. It's attached to a two-story house, now abandoned. The badger's vertical slits catch the night wind like sails. Inside, hidden vanes or angled walls direct the airflow downward, where it then cools the rooms below or, in some setups, flows directly into a yakhchal or cistern. This isn't just a fanless fan. It's an air-sculpting masterpiece. You enter the dusty building below the tower. The walls are thick, the windows narrow and shaded. You pause, and suddenly you feel it. A faint current of air drifting over your face, cool as if someone opened a fridge door nearby. It's not strong, but it's constant. And in a place where the outside temperature can hit 45 degrees Celsius, 113 degrees Fahrenheit, that whisper of a breeze might as well be a gift from the gods. The genius here is how badgers manipulate pressure. Wind flowing across the top of the tower creates a difference in air pressure, essentially sucking the hot air out of the building, while simultaneously dragging cooler air down. Some were even connected to underground water channels, canals, again, so the incoming breeze passed over cold water first, like nature's own version of a swamp cooler. Historians still debate just how standardized windcatchers were. Some argue they were invented in Yazd. Others say the idea migrated from Egypt or Mesopotamia and was then perfected in Persia. Some were simple single-direction vents. Others were octagonal monsters that could catch a breeze from any direction, like a giant desert snorkel. You glance up into the shaft of the windcatcher. It's dark, but not lifeless. You can see the stars through the slats at the top. Somewhere, a bird has built a nest, and the faint flapping of wings echoes faintly. Down the column, life always finds the coolest spot. You imagine a family, centuries ago, lounging below this tower during a hot summer night. No fans, no power, just soft cushions, maybe a jug of sweetened water, and the gentle sigh of wind cascading down through clay and time. A baby sleeps more easily. Grandparents hum stories. And someone complains, inevitably, that the old windcatcher worked better before you patched it with that cheap plaster. Here's a delightful detail. Some badgers had wooden louvers, or gushka literally, meat catchers, to keep birds or debris from falling in. That name alone tells you someone, somewhere, once found a pigeon in their soup and decided never again. And these weren't just for homes. Windcatchers were incorporated into bathhouses, marketplaces, even mosques. In some cases, they were combined with domed architecture to form a full-spectrum cooling experience. Imagine walking into a domed prayer hall, with a badger funneling cool air down from above and a qanat bubbling beneath your feet. If there was a Persian version of air-conditioned enlightenment, this was it. Of course, not all wind catchers were equal. Some were beautifully maintained, carved and painted, flaunting their owner's wealth. Others were patched with mismatched bricks and looked like the tower had a hangover. But rich or poor, the principle remained the same. Steal a little breeze, guide it gently, and never let the heat win. You sit on a stone bench inside the house, and let the air continue its slow dance across your skin. It's not loud, not aggressive, just comforting. The kind of breeze that doesn't just cool your body, it calms it. No whoosh, no whoosh, just that steady, sighing hush. Fun fact, in the hottest months, some families would even sleep beneath the badger itself, often in a central room designed to catch the maximum breeze. Picture a dad sprawled out on a woven mat, mumbling, "Move your feet, I can't feel the air," while two kids argue over who gets the pillow with the most wind access. Historians are still trying to understand just how advanced some of these designs became. Were they fine-tuned using trial and error? Or did Persian builders actually apply early knowledge of pressure and thermodynamics? Some argue they had basic principles of Bernoulli's law down long before Bernoulli ever picked up a quill. And of course, there are fringe theories like the idea that wind catchers doubled as spiritual conduits, drawing pure air from the heavens and pushing bad spirits out through the opposite vents. There's no proof, but given the fusion of religion and architecture back then, it wouldn't be surprising. You step outside again, back into the moonlight. The wind stands behind you, silent but proud. Not flashy, not fast, but relentless. It's a testament to patience, observation, and the art of letting the world do the work for you. You glance toward the horizon, where another tower pokes up beside a squat doman, another bagir, another yakhchal, and somewhere between them, an invisible conversation is happening. Air flowing, water cooling, heat yielding, slowly, gracefully, and you're right in the middle of it. Listening. You drift slowly through the quiet alleyways, wind catchers behind you now, yakhchals in the distance, and the desert stretching endlessly beyond. But there's something else drawing your attention tonight. Not the flashy towers or domes, but the walls themselves. Plain, brown, cracked in places, made of earth and straw. And yet somehow, they're still standing, still working. You pause and run your hand along one. It's rough, uneven, and warm from the fading touch of the sun. This is mud brick, the unsung hero of Persian architecture. No glossy marble, no dramatic carvings, just dirt, patience, and centuries of low-key brilliance. Step by step, you follow the lines of the walls, turning corners that snake like a slow dance around courtyards and narrow streets. The temperature here is noticeably cooler, even without a breeze. The mud brick acts like a thermal sponge, absorbing heat during the day, then releasing it slowly at night, just enough to keep things comfortable. Not too hot, not too cold. It's like the house is breathing with you. You duck beneath a low archway into a home's shaded courtyard. Birds rustle in fig trees. A clay jug sweats cool droplets near a bench. And all around you, these walls rise, not proudly, but reliably. They're thick, usually a meter or more, not for defense, but for insulation. Historians still debate exactly how ancient builders decided on the ideal wall thickness. Was it trial and error, passed down from master mason to apprentice like a secret recipe? Or was it written somewhere, in a dusty scroll that's long since crumbled into powder? Whatever the case, they nailed it. Because inside these homes, the temperature could remain a full 10 to 15 degrees cooler than outside, without a single fan blade spinning. You walk into one of the old rooms now. It's dark, but not gloomy, quiet, but not dead. And most importantly, it's pleasantly cool. You sit down on a mat. The air doesn't rush or swirl. It just sits calmly around you, like a loyal friend who doesn't need to say much. And you start noticing the details. The windows are high and narrow, placed strategically to avoid direct sun. The doors are made of wood, light but solid. The floors are often sunk slightly, taking advantage of cooler earth temperatures. And the ceiling, it's domed in places not to be fancy, but to allow heat to rise and gently drift away. The material mix varies. Some bricks are made from riverbed clay, others from sandy soil, mixed with straw, goat hair, or even fireplace ashes, carefully sifted and kneaded into the blend to increase fire resistance and longevity. A little gross, maybe, but clever. You start to understand something that modern buildings often forget. These homes weren't fighting the climate. They were cooperating with it. Instead of layering on technology to cancel out the heat, these structures simply absorbed it differently. And here's a quirky twist. Many walls were deliberately unfinished. Not because builders ran out of plaster, but because the raw mud brick surface helped trap less heat during the day. Shiny facades, by contrast, could reflect light and raise ambient temperatures in narrow alleys. The rougher, the better. Take that. Luxury condo developers. Some historians believe the mud brick techniques used in Persia might date all the way back to Elamite times over 3,000 years ago. That's older than the Parthenon, older than democracy, older than your leftovers in the fridge, hopefully. And yet, the principles haven't changed. Still, the construction process wasn't exactly glamorous. Workers would dig clay-rich soil, soak it in water, mix it with straw or chaff, then stump the mixture underfoot sometimes for hours. Then they'd slap it into rectangular molds and let the bricks dry under the sun. No kilns, no ovens, just time. You picture the scene. Rows of muddy rectangles baking slowly, like the world's driest batch of brownies. Children running between them, getting yelled at. Dogs sniffing suspiciously. Someone yelling, "Don't step on the wet ones again, Daryush." And yet, when the bricks were stacked into walls, they held firm. Not against tanks, sure, but against heat, wind, even mild earthquakes. Flexible, forgiving, and easy to repair. You didn't need a contractor. You needed a shovel and a cousin who owed you a favor. Even ceilings used similar techniques. Wooden beams laid across walls, covered in red mats, then packed with more mud and straw. Water-resistant, sort of. Elegant. Not really, but effective. Absolutely. You lie back and imagine rain falling, not often, but just enough to turn the whole ceiling into a squishy question mark. And still, the structure holds. And the best part, it breathes. Unlike concrete or steel, mud brick allows for slow air and moisture exchange. That means less mildew, more comfort, and you guessed it, better sleep. Some people today still build eco-homes using these same ancient principles. Because why reinvent the wheel when the original still spins? You rise again, stepping outside. The sun's completely gone now, replaced by a soft gray-blue sky filled with stars. A donkey brays somewhere, probably complaining about the temperature. You smile. The streets around you were designed with these same principles in mind, narrow and winding, to create shade tunnels and wind funnels. The layout of ancient Persian towns wasn't just aesthetic, it was tactical. Every angle, every turn helped mitigate heat, guide air, or block sand. No urban planners in high-vis vests, just generations of trial, error, and long, hot summers. Historians still argue whether these methods developed independently in each region, or if there was a centralized guild or council guiding construction. Some records mention architectural books shared between cities, but none have survived intact. So we're left to guess, or just sit in the shade and enjoy the results. You lean against a mud brick wall, its surface still faintly warm. Above you, swallows dart between wind catches. The night is quiet now, just the rustle of date palms, the shuffle of your own steps, and the occasional creak of an old wooden door swinging in the breeze. And all around you, these ancient, crumbling walls still do their job, being paid, unthanked, but never forgotten. They don't beep, they don't buzz, but they keep the heat out and the cold in. Like a good friend who doesn't need to be flashy to be useful. You give the wall a pat. Good job, wall.